Summary of The Sense of an Ending by Julian Barnes. The sense of an ending starts with a bunch of random pictures that are all memories of the main character and storyteller, Tony Webster. They go from a shiny inner wrist to cold bathwater behind a locked door. Tony thinks about how he still doesn't fully understand time, even though it has shaped and formed him. His story should start with school though, because that's where it all started, he says. In this scene, Tony talks about Adrian Finn coming to his all-boys London high school and becoming friends with Colin and Alex. Adrian will be the fourth friend, but he will stay a little away from the others. When Adrian makes a clever comment in history class with old Joe Hunt, Tony notices it and thanks Adrian. Tony is surprised when Adrian seems to take the praise seriously instead of making fun of it. Adrian is usually more serious than the others. He takes school events and teacher questions more seriously than Tony, Alex, and Colin, who try to be the smartest. Adrian is also smart. In literature class with Phil Dixon, he says that the meaning of a poem is eros and thanatos, which means sex and love. He will bring this up again when the students find out that Robson, another student at the school, killed himself. It's said that he did that after his lover got pregnant. After talking about his possible reasons, the boys come to the conclusion that what he did was weak and not logical. People tell the boys that they feel like their lives are in a holding pen, ready to begin. Adrian is the only one whose life seems a little more interesting. His parents are separated, which is unusual for people in their community, but Adrian doesn't talk much about his personal life. The thing Tony remembers most about him is how smart he was. When old Joe Hunt asked Adrian how to describe history in the last history class of the term, Adrian said that history is the confidence that comes from not having enough records and having bad memories. He used Robson's suicide as an example. After high school, the friends go their separate ways. Adrian gets a grant to Cambridge, and Tony starts studying history at Bristol. He meets his first girlfriend, Veronica Mary Elizabeth Ford. He calls her nice, but he also finds her scary because she loves poems, has high standards for records, and laughs at his ridiculous attempts to be smart. Tony really wants to have full sex with Veronica, but she won't let him. She asks him to join her family at Chislehurst in Kent one weekend. Tony feels very uncomfortable all weekend, especially around Veronica's father and her brother Jack. They are both nice and funny, but Tony thinks they are treating him with barely concealed disdain because of their high social and economic status. He also thinks that Veronica is pulling away from him, but he's not sure if he's just being anxious. Veronica's mother, Sarah Ford, talks to him in a strange way on Saturday morning. She seems artsy, relaxed, and casual, and she tells him not to let Veronica get away with too much. Sunday, Tony leaves. She waves at him in a mysterious way, and he wishes he had spent more time with her. Not long after that, Tony takes Veronica to see his high school friends. He finds out that Jack is at Cambridge, just like Adrian, and feels even less important than Adrian. Veronica and Tony keep dating in their second year, and she gives him more personal freedom with her. His answer that he likes to live in the present and is peaceable makes her feel uncomfortable, and she calls him weak. At this point in time, Tony says that work and Veronica took up most of his time in Bristol, but he also has some memories. One night, he and his friends stayed up late to watch the Severn Bore and were amazed at how time seemed to go backwards as the river changed direction and a wave came charging upstream. The next thing Tony remembers is Veronica sleeping with him after they broke up. He says that this happened almost without him choosing or wanting it to. He decides he doesn't want a relationship with Veronica as he throws away the condom. She is very upset when he tells her this. Tony tries to stay away from her. He sleeps with another girl for one night and studies hard in his last year. He gets a letter from Adrian one day telling him that he started dating Veronica and that he wants to talk to Tony about it. If Tony doesn't like it, Adrian will have to think about things again. Right away, Tony sends a jokey, casual postcard saying that everything is fine with him, but he's really angry. A few days later, he sends a real letter in which he writes, as far as Tony can remember, that he doesn't think much of their morals and that Veronica is manipulative and probably hurt, but Tony is still not sure what he meant by that. He writes that Adrian should talk to Veronica's mom about that. Tony goes on a few months' trip around the United States after finishing. During his time there, he goes out with a girl named Annie and loves how laid-back she is compared to Veronica. He finds a note from Alex when he gets back. It says that Adrian has killed himself. Tony and Alex get together to talk, and Tony finds out that Adrian left a letter saying that everyone has a philosophical duty to look at life as a gift that wasn't asked for, and if someone chooses to turn down the gift, they have a duty to deal with the effects of that decision. Both Alex and Tony agree that Adrian's death was pointless, and they respect how well he thought things through. They see Colin again a year after Adrian's death and talk about him. They promise to see each other again every year, but time goes by and they lose touch. Tony finds work as an arts administrator and meets Margaret there. They get married and have a girl named Susie together. Before long, Margaret meets the owner of a diner and breaks up with Tony for him. But the owner breaks up with Margaret too. They get back together with each other. Tony thinks, or tells himself, that Margaret doesn't mean it when she says they should get back together. Tony is now retired. He helps out at a hospital by pushing a library cart around as a volunteer, and he is a member of the local history club. He comes to the conclusion that his life has been interesting to him, but maybe not to many others. He remembers telling old Joe Hunt that history was made up of lies told by the winners, but now he knows that it's really the memories of the survivors, who were neither winners nor losers. Tony thinks about how getting older changes the way you think about time at the start of the second part of the book. Some things about him haven't changed. For example, he still likes some of the same music. He gets along well with Susie, but he feels like she talks down to him sometimes. Tony suddenly tells the reader what has really been triggering all the memories in the first part of the book. He has gotten a long white package from Eleanor Marriott, a lawyer, regarding Mrs. Sarah Ford's estate. Tony thinks about the weekend he spent in Chislehurst, but he can't remember anything important. He was left £500 and 2 papers by Mrs. Ford. One is a letter from her saying that she gave him Adrian's diary. She doesn't know why she did this, but she wants him to have it because she thinks that Adrian's last few months were happy. However, the book is not there. Eleanor Marriott says that Veronica Ford, who took care of her mother until she died, has it and does not want to give it back. When Tony calls his own lawyer, T.J. Gunnell, he tells him not to call what Veronica did a theft. Tony also asks for Veronica and Jack Ford's contact information, but only gets Jack Ford's. Jack doesn't do much to help. He sends Veronica a happy email from Singapore, but Tony thinks he might be lying. He's really sitting near an English golf course, laughing at him after all these years. But he does give Veronica his contact information. Margaret tells Tony to put the problem behind him, but he won't listen. More and more memories of his time with Veronica start to come back to him. These memories make him want her even more. Tony remembers that Veronica was stubborn and difficult, so he starts an email campaign to get the diary. He writes to her every few days and nothing but emails get her attention. Eleanor Marriott finally sends him a copy of a single page from her diary. Adrian has written a formula on the page with a bunch of letters on it. He wants to know how to figure out the connections between the people in his life and if it's possible to find a line of responsibility. So, for example, if Tony is written at the end of the page. Tony doesn't know what the page means, but the last sentence really worries him. He wonders if it's a vote on his whole life, on how he's chosen peace and comfort and been too focused on other people's approval. Veronica finally agrees to meet Tony at the London Bridge known as the Wobbly Bridge after he emails her it several times. Tony thinks she looks a little worn out when they meet. That's not what she says, but she does give Tony an envelope with a letter inside. It's a letter from a long time ago that he sent to Veronica and Adrian. In it, he calls Veronica a cockteaser and writes mean things about her. He also wants her to get pregnant before Adrian finds out she's a bore. Reading it makes Tony feel shocked and ashamed of himself as a child. He sees that telling him they were dating wasn't mean, he was too quick to label Veronica as cunning and dishonest. And he feels bad about his whole life, not just the letter. His dull and average life is so different from Adrian's brilliant one, which stands out even more because Adrian's life was so short. He still thinks about whether people's personalities change over time, why his marriage to Margaret ended, and how getting older makes him less sure about the past. He quickly sends an email to Veronica one night asking her if she thinks he was in love with her back then. She tells him that if he had to ask, the answer would be no. Margaret gets quiet and tells Tony that he's on his own now when Tony tells her this. Tony decides that Veronica needs to change how she feels about him and see that he's not as bad as that letter makes him seem. He writes to Veronica again to say sorry and find out more about her life. When asked about her parents, she seems almost happy to be asked and gives information. Her father drank too much and got cancer. Her mother moved to London and seemed to be doing well until a few years before she died. She started losing her memory. Tony looks for tricks in the email but only finds a normal, sad story. He sends another email to see if they can meet up, not for the date, but just to talk. On the way to their lunch date, he has a strong memory of her dancing and thinks about how much he loved their relationship, even though he sometimes felt physically frustrated with her. When they finally meet, he talks about his life the whole time, but she doesn't say a word. She leaves before he can stop her, having barely talked at all. After a long time of talking, Tony emails her again to say sorry. He wants to know more about her life and family. In response, she tells him to meet her at a North London tube stop she doesn't know. When he does, she tells him to get in her car and goes up a street until they see a group of 5 men and a care worker. Tony thinks the men are mentally ill. They are glad to see Veronica when she comes out. Back in the car, Tony is confused and asks her what she has to do with the goofy man and the other people, as well as why they called her Mary. Veronica clearly doesn't like him and tells him to leave. Tony is upset and feels especially ashamed that he thought he could have a connection with Veronica again now that he is so old. Margaret is mad at him, which makes him feel even worse. He is also more alone than ever. Still, he emails Jack to see if he can help him understand what's going on, but Jack doesn't answer. Tony goes back to North London by himself and goes back to the shop and pub where he and Veronica saw the group of guys coming in. He doesn't have anything else to do, so he chooses to start going to the pub every week. The group of guys does come in one day, along with another care worker. At one point, Tony runs into one of the guys at the bar. The man gives Tony a direct look, and Tony says in a low voice that he's a friend of Mary's. Because of this, the man gets mad, and Tony goes. It's clear to him that the man is Adrian's son, so he knows it must be his son with Veronica. Tony is shocked and saddened, but he also has to rethink how he's always thought about Adrian. He realizes that Adrian's suicide wasn't grand and brave, but rather selfish and weak at the same time. In an email, Tony tells Veronica what he's learned, but she only replies that he still doesn't get it and never will. There's a day when he drives back to the pub and sees the group of guys, along with Adrian's son. At one point, Terry, a care worker, comes over to ask who Tony is and says that Tony seems to be bothering Adrian's son, whose name is also Adrian. Tony says sorry and that he's going to leave. He tells Terry that he knows Adrian and used to know his father and mother, Mary. He must be wrong though, says Terry. Adrian is Mary's sister, not her son, and his mother died a few months ago. Last but not least, Tony gets it. Sarah Ford had slept with Adrian and had his son. He gets the formula in Adrian's piece of writing, which was an attempt to figure out how he was connected to Tony, Veronica, and Sarah Ford. For Adrian to figure out how damaged Veronica was, Tony told him to talk to her mother. At the end of the book, Tony realizes that he doesn't know or understand much more about the story and also doesn't know how responsible he really has to feel. He only feels a lot of stress.
About the author. Julian Barnes was born in Leicester. He went to Oxford to study modern languages. After that, he became a lexicographer for the Oxford English Dictionary Extra and helped put together its entries. In 1977, he started writing book reviews for The New Statesman and The New Review. Later, he became a writer for TV shows. His first book, Moorland, came out in 1980. However, Flaubert's Parrot, which came out in 1984 and was a big hit with critics, was his first major literary success. In it, the main character became obsessed with certain aspects of the life of the French author Gustave Flaubert in the 1800s. Barnes combined history and fiction in his first popular book, Arthur and George, inspired by an actual case investigated by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Many literary awards were given to The Sense of an Ending when it came out in 2011. The Only Story came out in 2018 and Elizabeth Finch in 2022.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.